Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to the 2022 Page Center Awards event. We're coming to you live from Penn State University's Park campus. I'm Bill Nielsen, and it's my great honor and privilege to serve as chairman of the advisory board of the Arthur W. Page Center for Integrity in Public Communication. Together with Marie Harden, Dean of the Belisario College of Communications here at Penn State, whom you will meet in a moment, we are delighted to welcome you to our 6th annual event. We sincerely are grateful for your interest and your continued support. I wish I could see you all. There are so many of you out there who I haven't seen in such a long time. But thank you for being here. The idea of the Page Center Awards event was born about 7 years ago. It emerged at our advisory board meeting out of our collective state of deep concern over what was happening in society and how it was affecting our disciplines in public communication, and the impact on public trust, which, after all, is our most important objective. We believe this will be an important and meaningful evening as we recognize 3 outstanding individuals and add them to our unique honor roll of leaders who have received the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communication. And information about our 16 previous honorees can be found on our website. Tonight, we have the great honor and pleasure of recognizing Andy Polanski, Chairman and CEO of IPG Dextra and Executive Chairman at Weber Shandwick; Christiane Amanpour, who is Chief International Anchor at CNN; and Ken Chenault, Chairman and Managing Director of General Catalyst and former Chairman and CEO of American Express. The Page Center was created by the late Larry Foster and his wife Ellen, both Penn State graduates. I know that Ellen is probably watching tonight with her family, and I want to say hello to all of them again. Larry began his career as a journalist, but he then became the longtime Chief Public Relations Officer at Johnson & Johnson. We again honor his legacy tonight as we seek to fulfill his vision. His vision was that all those engaged in communication with the public, notably journalists, public relations people, but also business executives, public service leaders, and politicians, shared a responsibility to the truth and fact-based reporting in their communications with the public. Larry and Ellen endowed the center, along with contributions from their friends and associates. Although we share the same namesake in Arthur W. Page, an AT&T executive, the center is a totally separate organization from Page, the Arthur W. Page Society. The center operates independently, as Marie and Denise Bortry, our director, will explain in a few moments. In order to provide firm links to facilitate the exchange of information between the Academic Research Center and the professionals in public communications, Larry called for the establishment of an outside advisory board. And I'd like to take a few moments to mention our advisory board members and single them out because they constitute an impressive, experienced group from across a very broad spectrum of public communications. So our advisory board includes the following: Roger Bolton, following his long career in communications, including Chief Communications Officer for Aetna, he is now president of Page Society. Sandra Clark, formerly with WHYY, she is now CEO of StoryCorps. Suki Dardarian, she's editor and senior vice president of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, obviously very busy over the last 2 years. Ellen Fisher, she is senior vice president of public relations and social media with the Ad Council. Amer Hines, she is the former CEO of Text 100 and also led the Page Society as its chairperson. Marie Harden, Dean of the Belisario College here at Penn State. Merrill McDonald, who is CEO of Gagan McDonald and a longtime practitioner. Bill Margaritis, former Chief Communications Officer at FedEx and now a business consultant and investor. Tom Martin, executive in residence at the College of Charleston and former VP of Communications for IT&T and FedEx. John Nichols is also a member. He's an emeritus professor of communications and former associate dean at the Belisario College. John Onoda, principal of IQ 360 and former communications leader at Charles Schwab, Visa, and General Motors. Gary Sheffer, following his post as Chief Communications Officer at GE, he is now the Sandra R. Fraser Professor of Public Relations at Boston University. Charlene Wheelis is also with us. She's a Senior Advisor for Equity and Justice at APCO Worldwide. She's an author and an immediate past chair of the Page Society. And Denise Bortry, Director of the Page Center and Associate Dean at Belisario College. Our board members provide crucial links between the Page Center and professionals engaged in public communication, and I think you can see from their backgrounds and experience, we benefit greatly from their points of view. So thanks to you all for your dedication to the Page Center. And it's now my great pleasure to welcome Marie Harden, Dean of the Belisario College. And I must tell you, Marie's drive, energy, commitment, and dedication to the Page Center give it and all of us our life and our vitality. Marie?
Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge Bill Nielsen, a driving force behind this event and the Page Center. Bill's accomplishments and reputation speak for themselves, and it's an honor to witness his passion for the Page Center's vision. Thank you, Bill. And I want to thank you all for being with us. We know you've spent a lot of time in front of screens the past 2 years. We're grateful to have students, faculty, professionals, and members of the public joining us from around the world. In the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications at Penn State, our mission is to prepare graduates to take their place as active, critical, ethical, and engaged participants, and ultimately leaders in their professions and in society. The Belisario College's faculty and staff promote the ethical, responsible use of media and messages by individuals, organizations, industries, and government. And perhaps no enterprise in the Belisario College fulfills our mission more completely than the Arthur W. Page Center. The Page Center was created in 2004 by public relations legend and great Penn State alumnus Larry Foster. Larry would be pleased to know how much the Page Center's network and influence has grown, and he would be proud to see this global audience sharing in his vision. What makes the Page Center exceptional? It's brilliant research scholars at colleges and universities around the world. To the many scholars who are watching, thank you. Your innovative and timely research is key to our success. You can all learn more about the research our scholars do on the Page Center blog at thepagecenter.org. And we encourage all of you to stay connected starting now. You can find Page Center social media links on the page with this video stream. And we also have a live chat room here on the screen, so chime in with your thoughts. Tell us where you're watching from and share words about the honorees. And to the students who are watching, head over to Twitter during this event to join other students, faculty, and Page Center representatives in a live conversation. Use hashtag Page Center Awards. Let us know what school you're from and what resonates with you from our honorees. I'll be there live tweeting the event too. Come say hi. And right now, I'd love to say hello to Ellen Fisher and others from who are joining us tonight on the Twitter feed. Keep up the comments, keep up the questions. We look forward to conversing with you. Again, join the conversation at hashtag Page Center Awards. And a special thank you to General Motors for sponsoring our student Twitter chat. Let me take a moment to recognize the people who put together this event. It wouldn't happen without Jonathan McVeary, who coordinates all of the communication for the center. And thank you again to the Page Center Advisory Board members for their support. And I need to give special recognition to Denise Bortry, who has been director since 2014. Her leadership continues to be transformative and inspiring. She's elevated the center's impact and placed it at a position of national and international prominence. Thank you, Denise. Now, let's watch a video to learn a little more about the Page Center.
What does promoting ethics and integrity mean? At the Page Center, it means funding research that helps communicators build trust with the public. It means building a foundation for tomorrow's professionals by offering ethics education for today's students. It means identifying leaders at the highest levels and shining a light on careers dedicated to communicating responsibly. The Page Center provides the funding for scholars to do what they do best: conduct innovative and timely research on topics vital to our industry. Scholars are experts who share in our commitment to enhancing ethics and responsibility.
We've got this brain drain, people being dissatisfied at work. They don't feel like they're heard. The Page Center supported our research that basically, to what extent are the attributes of good and or personal listening also indicative of good or competent listening with an organization?
Since 2004, we've funded 280 scholars with more than $1 million in research support. Our goal is to integrate this scholarly work into the cultures of agencies and corporations around the world.
Very few organizations provide funding for public relations researchers. And with the support from the center, we looked at how the chatbot media listening can help enhance perceived organization transparency and public trust towards the organization.
We deliver on our mission by providing evidence that businesses can thrive while being responsible and accountable communicators.
We hear a lot about division and how people don't want to speak to each other. It's very difficult in these times to really determine not just how people are doing their jobs, but how they are doing as people. And so listening, I think, is very integral to that.
The Research Roundtable is literally the Page Center's mission in action. Scholars and practitioners coming together and sharing their expertise.
A major issue for us is trust with our communities, particularly communities of color. My work with the Page Center syncs up very well with some of the major issues that we're dealing with in journalism.
We believe there is one constant in the unpredictable and ever-changing world of public communication: the need for integrity. We also believe the foundation for integrity can start in the classroom. That's why the Page Center launched its ethics training program, a free online curriculum covering 12 important topics in public relations.
I did the professional codes of ethics and media framing and ethics modules. It definitely helped me learn about ethics and morals that we need to know going into the PR world and just what we need to learn before we get an actual job.
For the 12,000 students who've registered, our modules have become a practical and reliable resource. Never more so than in 2020, when classes went virtual and instructors relied on the scholar-made lessons, videos, and quizzes to infuse ethics into their coursework.
It's really nice that it's provided for us easily and that we can complete in a timely manner.
We aim to elevate leaders who've built careers on integrity. That's why each February, we honor communication icons with the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communication.
When the late, great Larry Foster founded the Page Center, he described it as a lighthouse guiding us toward the highest standards of communication and ethical behavior.
The award is a testament to the leaders who inspire, teach, and lead with an adherence to values and a commitment to integrity.
You are, sir, an icon of integrity.
Last year, more than 1,000 viewers, many of them students, heard our 4 honorees give advice, share stories, and promote the importance of integrity in their work. The Page Center is a champion of ethics in all forms and at every level of public communication. We do this by honoring leaders who communicate with the public best, by educating the students who will communicate with the public tomorrow, and by empowering researchers who uncover the tools to help us communicate with the public ethically.
For 18 years, the Center has supported scholars from around the world who study the components we need for successful public communication. This event helps sustain that scholarly work and it's not too late to join our effort. Again, I point you to the screen where you can learn more about the Page Center and ways to help uphold the mission. Thank you again for joining us. Bill Nielsen will introduce our first presenter and honoree. Bill?
Thank you, Marie. On behalf of our profession, thank you for your dedication and commitment to the Page Center and to our profession. We are on a mission to improve public communication and to help restore public trust. This is an important, dramatic, and many believe a pivotal time in society, and we appreciate all of your efforts to help us move forward. We have 3 individuals to honor tonight. Each one will be introduced by a member of our advisory board. John Onoda will make the presentation to Andy Polansky. Suki Dadarian will recognize Christiane Amanpour. And John Awada, a former member of our advisory board, will recognize Ken Chenault. As we said, all of them are going to be receiving the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communication. So let's begin. Here's John Onoda.
Hello. We are in a profession in which we leave behind a large number of clues in regard to who we are and what we do. We produce a lot of work. We interact with many people. We make choices every day. Pieced together over time, these clues become our reputations. This is especially true for men and women in leadership positions, as their decisions reverberate throughout their organizations and their behavior is studied by everyone around them. Building a positive reputation when dealing daily with high-profile companies, brands, and issues is a notable feat. Building a reputation for consistent integrity and excellence over 4 decades is a remarkable one that deserves acknowledgement. This brings us to Andy Polansky, the CEO of IPG DXTRA and executive chairman of Weber Shandwick, who has been at the forefront of our industry for decades. Andy is a proud graduate of the College of New Jersey and sits on the board of its foundation. He started out as a reporter at 3 different newspapers in New Jersey. Then in 1983, he joined the firm known today as Weber Shandwick, and he never left. Over nearly 40 years, Andy helped to grow Weber Shandwick into one of the largest and best public relations agencies in the world. According to many, his leadership style always focused on people and values, collaboration, and direct communications. In a profession where people move from job to job frequently, Andy's long and loyal career at just one agency is rare. At this event, the focus is on communicating with integrity. Many of us find this challenging to do in our own work. Imagine how much more daunting it is to promote integrity in a global organization working for hundreds of clients around the world, trying to ensure that every claim is truthful, every statement is accurate, and that deeds are consistent with words. By all accounts, Andy has done better than most at meeting this challenge, while remaining one of the most likable people in our industry. Now let's take a moment to hear from some of Andy's acquaintances.
When I think about words that describe Andy, I think about kindness, I think about smart, I think about him being adept, humble, warm, and deeply interested in human beings and interested in the experience.
For me, there's not a singular moment of integrity. It's all the moments of Andy are integrity. It is his DNA, it's who he is, it's how he lives, it's how he works. It is just him. It is the definition of him, for sure.
Meetings, Andy made sure that we always understood that it was most important that everybody who worked with us, everybody we represented, we would always be able to be honest, candid, transparent.
When he was reflecting and seeking our advice on what to do about the pandemic, he always wanted to put what was right for our people at the center of his decisions. The conversation about what was right for the business was, of course, always lingering, but no matter what decisions we had to make for the business, he always wanted to do what was right for our people.
Andy, singularly, spectacularly devoted to making a difference for colleagues and clients, always.
The things Andy has accomplished in his time, the legacy he leaves behind, perhaps the most important one is the rules he set forth, the goals he established for us, and the fact that first and foremost, they always made sure that we focused on the issue of integrity in everything we did. Congratulations, Andy.
Wow. Well, Andy, congratulations on receiving the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Communications.
John, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm proud to be following in your footsteps and receiving this recognition. So thankful to Bill Nielsen and the Page Center board for this prestigious award, and humbled to be in the company of Christian and Ken. I've long admired their work in journalism and business. I've been truly blessed over these past 38 years to work with some of the best and brightest people in the communications profession. And together with my close partners at Weber Shandwick, including Gail Hyman and Harris Diamond, Jack Leslie, Laura Schoen, Abby Gold, Kathy Calhoun, Susan Howe, so many others, we always strive to build a firm that our people feel terrific to work at, and just so that always does the right thing, for our people and for our clients. I also want to thank my colleagues at IPG DXTRA. We've been through a lot these last couple of years, but I think with strong support from IPG, which has always provided support in terms of building best-in-class communications agencies with strong values, we've all emerged in a much more powerful, stronger position. So thank you. Well, I also want to thank my client partners, some of which go back many, many years. And one in particular I want to give a shout out to is my dear friend, Dick Johnson, who was a retired communications officer at Ingersoll Rand Company. And Dick taught me early on in my career that empathy, respecting everybody's points of view, and good humor were all foundational to success in a business that's all about people. I also want to thank my longtime assistant, Carla Messina, who's been partnering with me for 30 years now. She's just been terrific and I think a big contributor to our success at the firm. And then I guess, of course, at the top of my thank you list is my wife, Maria. I met Maria many moons ago at Trenton State College, now the College of New Jersey. It's where I developed my passion for journalism and communications. And I'm certainly looking forward to all the adventures we'll have when I retire for the business, from the business in June. And then finally, just want to also thank my boys, Jason and Steven, and their fiancés, Lauren and Charlotte, for all their love and support. So a lot to look forward to. And for now, I look forward to our chat, John. So back over to you.
Okay, well, I got questions for you. So since you did announce your retirement a few months ago, I imagine that you've already spent time reflecting on how communications has evolved since you started out in our field 38 years ago. So when it comes to communicating with integrity in the public space, what changes have you observed? Is it harder now, or has it always been hard?
Well, I think, certainly one does a lot of reflecting when one announces their retirement. We live in extraordinary times, and certainly the pace of change has been dramatic. The amount of information, the amount of misinformation, disinformation is striking. Sometimes it's hard to find the truth. But I think, to me, communicating with integrity, it comes back to core values. And I think that, it cuts to the heart of what our business is all about. It's telling the truth, being authentic. That, to me, hasn't changed. That should always come naturally, regardless of what the environment is like or what business dynamics might be. So that's something that I've thought a lot about, sort of what's changed and what hasn't changed, right, in a fundamental sense. The second thing I would say is just the importance of relationships. And to me, the heart of what we do in the public relations profession, it does come down to relationships. And for many years at Weber Shandwick, we did a lot of research around civility and, sort of tracking what I was just talking about, just looking at this environment, and we've kind of lost our way a little bit, perhaps, it'd be fair to say. But I think, what we do as communications professionals is we can be conveners. We can bring people together. We can meet around a table and engage in conversation and solve problems. And I think that's become more important than ever, and will continue to be more important as we go forward. And the third thing I would just say is I just naturally reflect on what a wonderful profession this is. I know we have a lot of college students on tuning in tonight, so I certainly wanted to say that. We have some folks, I'm sure, from my alma mater, TCNJ, and I just think it's a great place, a great industry to build a career, especially if you're intellectually curious, if you want to make impact. We're looking for terrific young voices who have a strong moral compass and great communication skills to come into the profession. So look forward to, I hope, meeting some of you down the road.
Terrific. So I have a question from Jackie Jones, the Dean of the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Morgan State University. And she asks, what is the hardest ethical professional decision you've ever wrestled with?
Well, gosh, there are always hard decisions to make. And that's feels like every day. But, I think we naturally, we meet as a team and think about the kind of clients we represent, the nature of the work we do. But to me, the hardest decisions are always around people. And if you think about what we've all experienced over the last couple of years in the pandemic, I mean, some of our businesses were hit fairly dramatically. So, on one hand, it was a trying time, where we were trying to help our clients navigate all these unprecedented issues. But then naturally in our role as leaders and my responsibility and accountability was to make sure that our people, we were doing the best we could by our people when our business was impacted. How do we think about that from a mental health perspective? How do we understand the public health environment and make sure that we're creating a safe environment for our people? And that's also very complicated. We operate in all around the world where the public health situation was different. So it was certainly a lot of sleepless nights, and always trying to create the right balance, make sure we're appreciating what our people were going through, and again, try to be as supportive as we could while we were also balancing all the other issues one balances in a business.
I think we can try to slip in one more question. So you're trying to build an organization of service-oriented people who try really hard to give the clients what the clients are requesting. But how do you uphold integrity in that culture when you need to instill a mindset in your people as well that they need to push back when clients are displaying ethical lapses, poor judgment, or even bad intent? How do you teach folks to balance the two?
Well, I think you always have to remind folks of what the firm stands for and what our values are. And that's a 24/7 job in essence. We do a lot of ethics training. We share the work that we do around the world. So, certainly we're very proud that, we're often called upon to drive demand for our clients' products and services, help them manage a variety of different crisis-oriented issues they might be dealing with. There's so much of that, but at the same time, in our profession, we're consultants. We're engaged to provide a point of view, right? And so, if sometimes we have to be the voice in the room to remind our clients and people in our organization about making sure we're living by our values, right? And so, that's what our job is. We're in the point of view business, and we're engaged to help with that sort of counsel when called upon.
Terrific. Well, I think our time is up. So Andy, thank you so much. And again, congratulations.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I am thrilled to be here today to honor Christiane Amanpour, someone I have watched throughout my years as a reporter and editor. She's a woman who has been an inspiration to so many others as she's built such a powerful career in journalism. She was born in England, raised in Iran, and made her way to the US to earn a degree in journalism. And just a few years after starting as a desk assistant at that startup known as CNN, she worked up to correspondent, then foreign correspondent, and was soon on her way to cover the first Gulf War. Then came the Balkans, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Rwanda. So many of us remember her on the ground during these conflicts. Her voice was clear and direct and authoritative as she bore witness to these stories, as she challenged officials and heads of state, as she sought to tell the truth. She is also someone who, with this front row view of history, challenged a core premise of neutrality in journalism, what some call a false equivalency. In fact, a few years ago, she returned to her alma mater, the University of Rhode Island, wearing a red sweater emblazoned with what had become something of a motto for her: truthful, not neutral, it said. Today, as the chief anchor of the Global Affairs program Amanpour, which also airs on PBS, she continues to illuminate and educate in search of the truth. Not only has she interviewed most of the world's top leaders, she's also won every major broadcast award and some of the highest honors in journalism. And she's continued to fight battles on many fronts, some personal, including standing up to ovarian cancer, some professional, such as her work with a host of international journalism organizations to help sound the alarm over threats to press freedom around the world. Christiane has been particularly outspoken in her support of women journalists. She wrote the foreword for a book published a few years ago, a collection of essays by Arab women who report on the Arab world. Here's what she said. Conflict zones today are even more dangerous than I experienced decades ago in Bosnia. Lines are more blurred, actions less predictable, the consequences of mistakes more dire. Those who choose to enter these theaters, both male and female, deserve our respect and admiration. As professional journalists, we must continue to nurture, encourage, support, protect, and fight for those who make this choice. We must also make sure more women are among these ranks, because without them, the stories of today and tomorrow will remain only partly told. I am so thankful for the work of Christiane Amanpour. And now, let's hear from some of her colleagues.
She's like a laser focused on the truth. She is courageous. She is a person who is authentically herself. And I would say is curious and yet uncompromising about her own principles, her values, and able to articulate those principles and values every day in the work that she does.
Christiane was a champion of the work that me and my colleagues did. She was always supportive. She was always involved. She always made you feel as though you were on her level, and I knew I wasn't.
Yes, she has integrity. She is a citizen of the world who cares deeply about the human beings that populate it. And I would say that she has displayed rare ability to look at the 30,000-foot geopolitics of things and also at the very human toll.
She has more than just integrity. She has shown kindness and help in a business where you always hear about the backbiting of others. Christiane has shown us how to be not just a journalist, but a friend and a wonderful female role model.
She is both a journalist filled with integrity and a human being filled with integrity.
Christiane, it is truly a privilege to honor you with the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communications. Congratulations.
Well, Suki and everybody, thank you so much. And here I actually have it in my London office. By the magic of telecommunications and teleporting, it arrived. So I'm very, very proud, really I am, particularly since this one is specifically for, as you describe it, integrity and ethical concerns in our very, very difficult times that we navigate right now. So this particularly does mean a lot.
Thank you. We have a number of questions we wanted to get through, a few from the universities that we work with. But I just wanted to start out, you've had such a profound impact from your work on the front lines, as well as the anchor desk through wars and disinformation campaigns, and like so many of us being labeled as the enemy of the people. What continues to drive you? What powers your journalism? What keeps you in this profession?
Well, precisely because I know we're not the enemy of people. We're exactly the opposite. We're their best friends because we're there to stand up for them, to tell their stories and to tell it truthfully, and not to play this bad and wrong game of either moral equivalency or both-siderism in terms of journalism. The truth is the truth, and I know that's an unpopular and an increasingly endangered concept right now, but I actually do believe that it exists. Of course, around it, you do have nuance and you have history and you have context, but the truth is the truth. And so the way I was able to, without really thinking of it as a big deal, because that's what we used to do as reporters, used to go out and actually find the story, talk to the people to whom the story was being done, and then report it back to your viewers, our viewers. Now you see rather too much armchair analysis. I call them armchair generals, armchair warriors, people who just go somewhere, stand in front of a camera and do live shots all day. That is not what I used to do. What I used to do and what I believe to be real journalism is to be the eyes and ears of our viewers, to go out, whether it's a Bosnia or even now Ukraine and Russia, to go out and actually talk to the people on the very, very ground level. And then also talk to the soldiers, also talk to the leaders. You have to get a full picture of what's going on. And that's what kept me going during all those years I was in the field, because I did feel that we were coming back with the kind of stories and the kind of perspectives that could be relatable. I think it's much more relatable to an American audience or a global audience when you hear from people themselves, and when it's not just all about the journalist yammering or having the camera trained on us. That's not the journalist that I grew up to be.
So I want to build on that a little bit, going back to that mantra, truthful, not neutral. Can you explain that a little bit? And particularly given the backdrop of widespread disinformation campaigns here and around the world.
Well, look, I unknowingly, but it happened to be the case, when I was covering the war in Bosnia, in the Balkans during the 90s, it was really the first of my experience and of my generation's experience to see a concentrated disinformation campaign being waged by mostly one side, and these were the Bosnian Serbs backed by their protectors in Serbia, so Milosevic and all his underlings. And so what I see happening now between Ukraine and Russia, I immediately can trace it back to there. And I can see that, even the idea of false flags, right? The idea, for instance, in Bosnia, there were several, gruesome attacks on the city of Sarajevo, which we know to have been besieged by the Bosnian Serbs, again, with their Serbian military backers, heavy artillery on the hills, sniping from the hills and shooting the civilians and us as well down in the city of Sarajevo, which was in the valley. All to say that we knew all this, and yet when a terrible, bloody disaster happened in Sarajevo, suddenly it wasn't the Serbs who did it. Oh my goodness, it couldn't have been. It must have been the victims who did it to themselves. These were false flag operations, the famous market massacres. I mean, it took forever for the world to understand that this actually happened to the victims in the city. But at that time, the Serbs used to say, no, it was the Muslims who did it to themselves. And therefore the rest of the world said, okay, then we can't intervene. We mustn't go in to help because all sides are equally guilty. And, you know, centuries of ethnic hatred, all disinformation, which we're seeing in much more sophisticated forms between Russia and Ukraine right now. And so I have this sort of background that I can pull on. And bringing it back to the truthful, not neutral, that kind of context allows a disinterested international community to sit back and not enter and not take part in trying to rescue or help the victims. Because if all sides are equally guilty, and oh my goodness, if the victims are actually doing it to themselves, then what are we going to do to intervene? Well, we knew that that wasn't true. And so I learned in Bosnia to be truthful and not neutral. And because Bosnia was a case first of ethnic cleansing and then genocide, I simply grew to understand, and it was a learning, thing for me, because it was my first major war of this kind, that I could not be an accessory, A, to lies, and B, to genocide.
Well, that leads into my next question. And the Page Center is focused on the intersection of just these things: integrity, trust, credibility, communication. We asked students and faculty to submit questions, and a number of them focused on ethical and moral challenges. And Penn State's Gianna Delegati has a question. Can you recall a time where your integrity and ethics were put to the test?
Yes, and it was right again in Bosnia, but many times. Israel, Palestine, I'm always accused of whatever, favoring one or the other, but usually the Israelis accuse me of favoring the Palestinians. Or Iran, United States, I'm accused, because I grew up in Iran, of siding with the Iranians. Or again in Bosnia, accused of quote unquote siding with the Muslims, I'm sorry to say, but this is what people used to say about journalists, going native, right? Sort of Stockholm syndrome. Well, of course, I knew that wasn't true. I'm just incredibly fair, firm, and I seek the truth as best as possible. The people who criticize are the people who do not want to hear the truth because it doesn't fit their political narrative or their vision of whether they should help or move in. But I was very, very upset when over Bosnia, in the first couple of years, an article had been written about my coverage there, and an anonymous source inside CNN, so one of my colleagues had said, it's very troubling. She's siding with just one party to this, and she's lost her objectivity. Well, that made me very upset, obviously, but it also made me sit back and ask myself, and now I use it in speeches and anytime I can instruct or talk about this, it made me define the notion of objectivity. And so I said, and I say, objectivity means giving all sides a hearing, of course. It does not mean saying all sides are equal. It does not mean creating either a factual or a moral false equivalence. And that for me was, it was something that I came to because I had been criticized. And all to say that I'm glad I was criticized. It created a necessity for me to re-examine my own code of conduct and professional ethics, and to say, well, yeah, this really hurts, but, and I was young, and it stood me in good stead for the rest of my career, and it gave me a solid foundation.
That's a great story. You have talked about the threats, physical threats, particularly when you were in war zones, but also more recently about different kinds of threats that journalists are feeling, moral threats to their courage. And and that just being in a war zone is courageous, but it's also courageous to be a journalist anywhere today. Can you talk about that moral courage a little bit?
Well, I go back and I often like to quote Robert F. Kennedy, who in South Africa talked about, the moral imperative, the conscience, and that, when you talk about conscience and you talk about you define what is your moral imperative, then those ripples are much, much wider than just standing up, to physical danger. Moral courage is as important as physical courage. And often that's just very difficult for people, for very many people. I'm sure it was difficult for me at one time. There are many reasons for it, because when you take a stand, you have to be prepared to defend that stand, first and foremost. You have to be knowledgeable enough and sure enough that you've got it right to defend that stand successfully. And then you have to cope with the fact that, in fact, it's going to really tick a lot of people off. And you have to, at least I did, I decided that there and then, I didn't care whether I was liked or not. It wasn't a job it wasn't a popularity contest, being a correspondent. And that was very liberating, because that allowed me to be more courageous than I might have been, morally, than I might have been had I been second guessing everybody who was watching, thinking, and judging me. And when I say me, I really do mean CNN as well, because I'm me because of CNN. The reason is because I'm on a global platform that was the first global platform before any other global platforms. And so we were big targets, and I was a big target. But I think on balance, I'm really pleased with the way it's all turned out.
Well, speaking of CNN, so many institutions are under fire these days, including media companies. They've been disrupted by technology. Some have been entangled in politics or controversy. Recently, CNN itself has seen challenges through the Como investigations and recent departure of its president. A question from Enrique Nunez Musa from Michigan State University is this: how do you evaluate the evolution of CNN since you began reporting at the network?
Well, I said that I believe that there have been, 3 very, very consequential presidents of CNN under the auspices of Ted Turner, the founder, who created a revolution in our medium and in our information age. At that crucial point in the 20th century, Ted Turner came along with this startup, but that had such a massive impact on the world and on the world of information. And at a time when information was becoming the main tool of power, it wasn't money, it wasn't position like royalty or whatever. It really was information. Who has the information has the power. And we see it being played out in a much more corrupt way right now with fake news and conspiracy theories and all the algorithms and the way social media plays into it. But at the time, it was a slightly more pure form of information. So first of all, to join a platform that was revolutionary was something phenomenal. We didn't understand fully how revolutionary it was as we were the foot soldiers, conducting this revolution, but it really was. So that was the evolution of CNN, that Ted Turner said, we're not going to be elitist. We're not going to be, just holding information for the powerful few. We want to democratize information, which is what he did, not just with CNN, but with CNN International, because 5 years after creating CNN, he took it internationally. And that meant that people, this is what he said, and it's true, that people in parts of the world that are non-democratic and that only have state-sponsored information, whether it's on radio, television, or in the printed press, now they had an alternative. If they could find it and capture it on a satellite or whatever, they had alternative information. So that for me was just mega. That was like huge for me. And, our first president, Burt Reinhardt, was excellent. He was a very important, and I know this sounds crazy, but he looked at the purse strings and was able to commit journalism while keeping the network afloat. Because there are many, many, many stories that remind us that Ted Turner could have sunk under the weight of debt and all the rest of it at any time. But he didn't, because everybody pitched in, including President Burt Reinhardt, and he was from about 1980-ish until 1990, and then Tom Johnson came in 1990, and he was head for the next decade, and he presided over an amazing golden era of news gathering, and he paid a little bit more attention to the programming, making it more accessible to people. But it was really, you know, from the Gulf War to the fall of the Soviet Union to the fall of apartheid to 2 genocides, Bosnia and in Rwanda, and you know, and even a peace process, the Oslo peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. There was so much happening, and Tom Johnson presided over that, and we were an amazing, unrivaled news gathering enterprise. Then came 9/11, and you know what? I think, like many organizations, and it's not just the media, 9/11 really knocked a lot of people for a loop. Unfortunately, with the Bush administration, the mantra that they came in with, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists, had a terrible effect because it seeped into the DNA of American media as well. So I think journalism became more fearful. It became more towing the party line. You didn't want to be called a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer. That led to, unfortunately, certain segments of the media supporting what we now know to be, and what we then knew to be, a wrong war in Iraq. And all that has flowed from it has been very bad for society in general and for the media. Then we had in 2012, and by the way, at that time, our ratings just kept going down because the trust in the media around the, you know, globally was diminishing. And then came Jeff Zucker, who was given this task of figuring out how to reposition CNN, which he did. And he dragged us out of a ratings hole that nobody thought could work, and it did. And so that's been the last 10 years. And again, repositioned CNN very forcefully you know, you had to listen to CNN again, couldn't not pay attention to CNN. So CNN has survived, you know, the ups and the downs, and it's always news gathering that keeps CNN, you know, indispensable. And I do believe it's indispensable for its news gathering and for what it means in today's world.
I have one last question. You know, I think many of the journalism students listening to you might be inspired to go into foreign correspondency. We have a question from Emily Kinsky of West Texas A&M University. What recommendations would you offer to students who end up covering stories abroad one day? How can they maintain their integrity and ethical boundaries as they work in these areas with differing journalistic rules and expectations?
Well, there aren't different journalistic rules and expectations, or there shouldn't be. And anybody who works as a journalist should understand that there's one rule, and that is you follow the truth, you don't make things up, and you source and double source, and you make sure that you have the best information at your hand before you broadcast or deliver it in some form or fashion. And then my strong advice would be, and it becomes more difficult these days, but nonetheless, I would advise young journalists just never to be political and never to unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure on many journalists in many different organizations, not just in the US, but around the world, because as politics has become more partisan, those partisan leaders have shoved journalists and forced them into partisan corners, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Egypt, Russia, wherever it might be, where if you don't toe the party line, and if you don't burnish the credentials of the government, whoever it might be, you are in physical danger of your life in some of these other countries. And in the US, you're in danger of being trolled or, all the other things. And as you know, some journalists in the US are receiving death threats right now if they're not perceived to toe the line that some or other thinks they should be towing, in this crazy social media world that we live in. So that's difficult, but I would fully recommend to anybody who wants to do this to just know what it means to be a journalist, just play it straight and go out there and do it. And I do say go out there and do it because I have advised a lot of young people who come to me direct and ask me, what should I do if I want to be a foreign correspondent? And I say, well, okay, now we're in a bit of a sort of another golden age. There's quite a lot of foreign correspondence and the need to know what's going on in the world. But if you're not being successful in being sent somewhere by your own organization, then try going yourself and see what you can pick up and see what you can send back, see if it's useful, see if it's picked up, and build your career and your body of work like that. So that's what I say. And of course, these days, there's so many more opportunities because there's so many more platforms, so much self-generated content as well, podcasts, all the rest of it. It's not the small opportunities that existed when I was coming up through the ranks. It's a much broader field with huge platforms that need to be filled, and content, people want it. But as I say, read up on what the rules of journalism are, follow them. Don't get swayed one way or the other, and remember, you're not there to help any political party whatsoever, or any political.
Christiane, congratulations on this award, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I really love it. It's a very nice shape, and it's heavy, so I could use it maybe to do some exercises. My biceps. But anyway, thank you very much, everybody. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
It's my great honor to introduce the next recipient of the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communication, Ken Chenault. Today, Ken is chairman and managing director of the venture capital firm General Catalyst, but perhaps he's best known as chairman and chief executive officer of American Express, a position he held for 17 years. There is so much that can be said about Ken's stewardship of that iconic company, but perhaps Warren Buffett, American Express's largest shareholder, said it best upon Ken's retirement. This is what he said: Ken has been the gold standard for corporate leadership and the benchmark that I measure others against. Ken is recognized as one of the business world's experts on brands and brand management. Fortune magazine named him one of the world's 50 greatest leaders in its inaugural list in 2014 and again in 2021. Ken, together with Ken Frazier, was listed in Time 100's most influential people of 2021 for their corporate and social activism, specifically for mobilizing hundreds of corporate leaders to advocate for equitable voting rights, and for co-founding 110, a coalition of leading executives coming together to upskill, hire, and advance 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years into family-sustaining jobs. Today at General Catalyst, Ken focuses on investing in fast-growing companies that have the potential to become large fundamental institutions. He serves on many boards, including Airbnb, Berkshire Hathaway, and the Harvard Corporation. Now, let's hear from a few individuals about Ken's impact on their lives.
Ken is an example of how you bring integrity to life in all you do as a leader, from the business decisions you make, to the stands you're willing to take, to the way that you conduct yourself personally and not just publicly.
So Ken is a phenomenal guy. In a couple words: strategic, insightful, high values, great integrity.
And I've seen it time and again. Throughout his career, Ken was able to do something that was difficult as a CEO who was African American, and that is to remain authentic, to remain committed to his community, and to remain committed to the cause for justice and freedom for all Americans.
And I can't think of a better award for Ken, because in all dimensions of his life, he has raised the bar for all of us as to what a leader with integrity does.
He's taken some really courageous, bold positions that are important, like on voter rights. He's been courageous. He's gathered support. He argues his case based on, again, a value system and integrity.
Integrity has been integral to Ken's leadership, indeed his identity.
Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Ken Chenault.
Thank you, John, for those kind words. I am deeply honored to be awarded the Larry Foster Award from the Page Center. Thank you.
Ken, we have a few questions we'd like to ask you about. The first comes from a student. Her name is Morgan Percararo. She's a senior public relations student at James Madison University. Here's what she asked. You are known for holding strong personal values. What is a time that your values came into play and you needed to make a difficult decision?
I think that's an excellent question. Certainly, I had to confront a number of very challenging issues. But I would say that the most challenging for me was really 9/11. American Express, we lost 11 of our colleagues in the North Tower. And our businesses were severely harmed by the attack. The travel business slumped dramatically. Card spending dropped. And I had to make a decision of what was best for the company and our future. And this goes to one of, I think, the important leadership attributes that I've tried to live up to, is that I think you have to be both a decisive and caring leader. And what I decided I needed to do was I needed to, in fact, cut back our workforce by 15% at a time when the company and our people were traumatized by the event. Now, what we tried to do is we tried to implement these actions in a very compassionate way. But I think what's important is, one, I really was very focused on doing what I thought was right for the company. At the same time, I cared tremendously about the people of American Express. And so I think the value that is most important is integrity. And I think that we were able to bring about a very important set of changes at the company because I believe we adhered to core values.
It's hard to believe it's been over 20 years, but what played out at American Express under your leadership, Ken, is so vivid to this day. I have a question for you. An increasing number of CEOs and boards are embracing the idea of serving all stakeholders versus focusing on only shareholders or even focusing just on customers. Why do you think this is happening now? And how do you think about this? Some call it stakeholder capitalism.
Yeah, I think what's very important, John, and this is something I've fundamentally believe in, is that corporations exist because society allows us to exist. And we have a responsibility to help build a healthy society. And I feel this very strongly because I think as a CEO, we want to build enduring companies. If you want to build an enduring company and you're focused on long-term success, you can't ignore what happens in our society. And I think what is very important is there's a recognition in a more explicit way now that we have a wide range of stakeholders. And society is one of those stakeholders. I think what's very important, and I feel this in a very deep way, that corporations can in fact be a force for positive change. And I think what is absolutely critical is that corporations have to recognize their role in society. So I am a big supporter of stakeholder capitalism. One of the things I've been very focused on at General Catalyst is a concept that we call responsible innovation. Because the reality is technology is changing the world. Every business is very dependent on technology. And for new companies, one of the things we're telling them is focus on having a broad view of what your responsibilities are. And so responsible innovation is critical to deal with the unintended consequences of technology. We think there are 5 pillars: economic opportunity and inclusion, the environment and sustainability, openness and diversity through workforce transformation, privacy, safety and security, and then intentionality and impact. And these are pillars that we think companies starting out should have in mind, as well as companies that have been in business for a long time.
That's a lot, but they all seem to be connected to your belief about society allowing businesses to operate and our responsibilities, therefore. Here's a question from a professor, Frank Dardis. He's associate professor at Penn State. This question is this, Ken. What is the value of transparency in communication in organizations, and particularly for the role of CEO?
Yeah, I think that goes to the core of leadership. I think transparency is absolutely essential if you want to be an enduring leader, if you want to capture the hearts and minds of your people. And to me, what it really represents, my definition of integrity, is the consistency of words and actions. And I think that leaders have a responsibility to be transparent and truthful, because the most important attribute for a leader to gain is trust. And trust is not going to happen if people do not think you're being transparent. So one of the things that I talk about with CEOs is you need to talk about the context that you're operating in to make decisions. You should acknowledge where there's tension. Just as I talked about with respect to the action I took in 9/11, is you've got to be both decisive and you've got to be compassionate. But you've got to talk to the organization in a way that they understand the reasons for your actions. So I think that question goes to the core of what a leader needs to be focused on.
I have one last one briefly, Ken. I have the pleasure of working with you and Sam Palmisano at the Data and Trust Alliance. And perhaps just a comment from you as to why did you and Sam start it among the conversations you had with CEOs a few years ago?
So I think what was very important, and let me just say to everyone that John is our leader for the Data Trust Alliance and has made just an incredible difference. But what Sam and I thought after talking to a number of CEOs is increasingly CEOs were recognizing that they were becoming data enterprises, that every company, irrespective of industry, was a data enterprise. Secondly, the pace of change in technology was incredible. And AI and machine learning represented yet another inflection point. And so we were very concerned about unintended consequences in the use of technology. We were very concerned that we needed to put together standards. And what's important about this with the Data Trust Alliance, and you saw this in the algorithmic bias announcement that we made, was we said we have to implement. We have to take action. Simply issuing pronouncements is not enough. So I think what is very exciting to me is you have companies voluntarily coming together who in fact recognize their role in a fast-moving world, that companies need to act responsibly with the data that they have. And so I'm incredibly encouraged by what we're doing. And I think the Data Trust Alliance is an example that companies collectively, what's very important is companies collectively said, we're going to implement. That is rare. And I think it is yet another example, I think, of companies recognizing not just the responsibility they have in the company, not just the responsibility that they have with the vendors that they work with, but the responsibility that they have to society overall.
Well, Ken, thank you. It's a privilege to work with you on that particular initiative. You have so many, but it's been a pleasure to chat with you this evening and to congratulate you on this honor. Thank you, Ken, very much.
Thank you. Again, I'm deeply honored.
Wow, I'm sure we've all gained inspiration from the demonstrable and palpable dedication of our honorees. So why is all of this so important? As we've observed in the past, we are in the midst of a huge change in every sector of our society and globally. Today's media landscape has been observed as fractured and chaotic. Reversing the erosion of public trust is a daunting challenge, to say the very least. In addition to working to restore public trust in our institutions and sources of information, new orders of business are being put into place, and change makers are emerging everywhere, including from, and importantly, from younger generations. A big issue that we face is disinformation, and I want to put in a word for the Institute for Public Relations here tonight, who today released their third annual study of disinformation in America. And if you Google the Institute for Public Relations, you'll find access to it. It's something that we all ought to read because it provides a very important measure of what people think these days. And over 2/3 of Americans believe that disinformation is getting in the way of our desire to move forward. And unfortunately, the pandemic has caused further divisiveness and brought forward significant problems that stand in the way of the unity that we seek as a nation. Racism, income inequality, health equity, and questionable leadership, just to name a few. Fake news continues to confound us, and the WHO and many others say fake news has greatly interfered with attempts to deal with the coronavirus, including causing people to doubt the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines and the treatments that are being developed. We know that change for the better is only achieved through effective communication with the public, to create awareness and understanding of the facts and the truth, and then to articulate the rationale for change and to encourage acceptance of change. That's our order. All of us in the many disciplines of communication are at the center of this very important time in history, with the skills and, importantly, with the values to help find the way forward. And this is a huge responsibility. Tonight we have recognized and honored iconic individuals who are richly deserving of public trust. Those were wonderful interviews. Let's follow the examples they have set, and all of our previous honorees have set. We are the facilitators of change, and this mission, the restoration of public trust, is critically important. In this effort, we must not fail. In fact, we must prevail on the strength of our personal commitments to integrity in public communication. We share the conviction that communicating with the public is a very high responsibility. It is a discipline that we don't take lightly, and we pledge to see that it is not corrupted. Thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. We look forward to seeing you next year, hopefully at an in-person dinner event. As we close, we'd like to express our sincere thanks and appreciation for our sponsors. With their support, we have been able to make this virtual event free of charge. But the support of our sponsors goes well beyond financial help. They have all endorsed the mission of our event and join us in a strong commitment to integrity in public communication. Special thanks to our platinum sponsors, General Motors, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and Weber Shandwick, who have each made major contributions to tonight's event, proving that integrity is a priority and a value worth endorsing. Before we end tonight, let's hear from some of these companies.
Today, we're recognizing Christiane Amanpour, Ken Chenault, and Andy Polanski with the Larry Foster Award for Integrity in Public Communications. At GM, integrity is a core part of our DNA and who we are as a company. So to stand with these three individuals at this moment is indeed an honor for me personally and on behalf of all of General Motors. And so I'd simply like to say congratulations and thank you for all of the work that you've done, Christiane, Ken, and Andy.
Leaders and communicators make a difference through words and actions. Where people are confused, we provide credible and trusted sources of information. Where people feel lost, we guide and empower them. Where people are hungry for progress, we act decisively and with urgency. And where people feel hopeless, we inspire. The Page Center teaches us this is our profession's highest calling.
Hello, I'm Crystal Downing, Chief Communications and Public Affairs Officer of Merck. And it's my pleasure to extend our company's congratulations to Christiane Amanpour, Ken Chenault, and Andy Polanski. The world needs trusted sources of information, and Merck is delighted to work alongside professionals of this caliber who share in our commitment to ethics and integrity in all that we do. Merck applauds the Page Center and each of you.
Thanks very much again for being with us. In closing, let me quote Lester Holt, who closes the NBC Nightly News every night with this thought: take care of yourselves and each other. And thank you again for your support. Good night.